Good morning, everyone. As a reminder, I'm Meredith Hintz. I'm the Executive Director of the COPIC Medical Foundation. A reminder, our RFP posted yesterday. Be sure to check it out. And Director of Corporate Social Responsibility at COPIC, a company that invests in the communities we serve by promoting healthcare quality and patient safety. Thank you for joining us for Embrace the Change, Maintaining and Building Momentum in DEI&A, where we will all learn strategies on how your organization can maintain and build its momentum in advancing DEI&A. And this live recording will be transformed into a podcast on Ramona's podcast, The Empowerment Zone. Ramona Houston, Ph.D., PMP, is on a mission to create a healthy, just, and caring global community. A social entrepreneur, Ramona is the founder and chief strategist of a boutique social impact agency for brands who believe in doing good. The agency is an essential partner for visionaries that invest in social impact and want to use their power and platforms to build a socially equitable and sustainable global community. A scholar, social impact strategist, speaker, and host of the Empowerment Zone podcast, Ramona is passionate about people and communities working together to solve national and global challenges. Steve Federico. Dr. Steve Federico is the new Chief Government and Community Affairs Officer for Denver Health. Dr. Federico is currently the Director of General Pediatrics and School and Community Health Programs, and is the Associate Professor of General Pediatrics at the University of Colorado School of Medicine. His past work at Denver Health has been as Director of Service for Pediatrics in the Community Health Centers and Medical Director of School-Based Health Centers. He will assume his new duties beginning in January. And finally, Demisha Hill. As Managing Director of the Janus Foundation and Head of Diversity and Community Relations for Janus Henderson Investors, Demisha serves as the champion for community engagement programs and provides leadership and strategic support for the corporate diversity and community outreach initiatives. In her role, she actively develops corporate-wide community employee engagement opportunities and fosters the 12 diversity and inclusion employee resource groups. Demisha invests time in collaborating outside of Janus with nonprofit organizations such as Inroads, the Cherry Creek Chamber of Commerce, Junior Achievement, and Out and Equal. She also serves on the board of directors for the Denver Metro Chamber Leadership Foundation, Cleo Parker Robinson Dance, and Colorado Succeeds, and formerly served on the advisory board of CIVIC. As a reminder, all workshops will be recorded and resources mentioned will be available after the summit for all attendees. We will save time at the end of the presentation for audience Q&A, and don't forget to share what you're learning on social and be sure to tag CIVIC. With that, take it away, Ramona.
Thank you, Meredith, for that warm introduction. This is actually, hello, good morning. I am Ramona Houston from Atlanta, Georgia, and this is my 4th CIVIC Summit. I actually began in 2020 with an invitation from Southwest Airlines. So I thank them for always inviting me to participate in the event. Thank you to Lexley Mueller and the Southwest Airlines family. Also, thank you to Jessica Welser and Olivia Barrows, and the board members and all the committee members for creating such a great conference. Don't y'all think? It's been good? Yes. It's great to bring the private sector and the public sector together, as well as educators together, to really talk about how do we solve problems and challenges in our community, and CIVIC is one of those spaces that we can do that. So as moderator of this session, I want to begin by framing our conversation and giving a little information about diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility. In the year 2000, under the leadership of Kofi Annan, who was then Secretary General of the United Nations, he is a diplomat from Ghana, which is a country in West Africa. He, along with corporate partners, established what we call the United Nations Global Compact of shared values and principles to build a more sustainable world. And those turned into the 17 SDGs, Sustainable Development Goals. And the purpose of CIVIC is to provide a forum that creates a culture and an environment that encourages businesses of the Metro Denver and Colorado region to invest in our communities and build a more sustainable world. And diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility is a part and important component of sustainability. And unlike many issues, DEI&A is not a choice, it's a responsibility. This panel, Embrace the Change, Maintaining and Building Momentum in DEI&A, provides strategies on how do we as a community advance DEI&A in our organizations and in our businesses. So let's begin by defining each of these terms. Diversity is the practice of supporting, fostering, and respecting the presence of difference in your community. Organizations that reflect diversity, they reflect it through their composition as well as through demonstrating difference. Difference is reflected in all types of ways: age, race, ethnicity, gender, perspectives, geography, executive level to management level positions. All types of positions reflect diversity. Equity is the practice of instituting conditions where everyone has the opportunity to succeed throughout your organizations. So equity ensures that your organization identifies as well as is intentional about creating equity in your community. And they want to eliminate all types of barriers to create equity in the playing field. Next is inclusion. Inclusion is the practice of creating a welcoming environment for everyone in your organization. Organizations that practice inclusion encourage the participation and acknowledge the contributions of everyone. Lastly is accessibility. It is the practice of providing equitable access to everyone in your organization, regardless of ability. So accessibility is not just about following ADA. It's also about knowing that everyone has different access to your organization, and therefore you have to create strategies to make sure that everyone can participate. So accessibility, unlike the other two, must be planned in advance. For example, accessibility can be reflected here at CIVIC by creating this as a virtual summit, changing the location, as well as providing scholarships. So DEI&A, one of the questions we always ask is, why is it important? And it's important because it is tied to your success of your organization. People that, organizations and businesses that promote diversity, they are much more successful than other organizations because they are able to recruit the best talent. They are able to reach customers that they probably would not have reached. They have higher ESG ratings, which makes it where more investors want to actually invest in your organization. But the challenge that many DEI&A practitioners have is that we have not quite figured out how to tie DEI&A into our profits and into market share. So that's one of the things that we need to work on in our industry. So the question becomes, when is DEI&A effective? And it's effective when you incorporate it have 5 key elements. One is leadership, and that means leadership on all levels, from the executive level all the way down to the management level, as well as people who don't hold leadership positions can be very influential in your organization. So leadership is very important if you're going to incorporate DEI&A in all levels of your organization. Secondly is commitment. Organizations must be intentional about their DEI&A efforts. 3 is investment. You have to invest energy, time, money, and resources, both human and financial, to ensure that you advance DEI&A. You have to have effective communication. One part of effective communication is understanding your why, which Kevin talked about quite a bit earlier in one of his sessions, is your organizations in all levels need to understand why you want to engage in DEI&A. And then the second component of effective communication is actually radical listening. You have to be able to listen to people in your team, in your organization, to make sure that you're effective in your DEI&A efforts. And lastly, be authentic. People know, your team knows when you're not being authentic about your DEI&A efforts. So leadership, commitment, investment, and effective communication is vital if you want to incorporate DEI&A throughout your organization. So in 2020, we see a rise in consciousness of people wanting to, and organizations really wanting to buy into DEI&A. But in 2023, just a mere 3 years later, we see DEI&A fatigue, and it's represented in the decrease of interest and investment in DEI&A. And so this session, what we want to do, the key question for our panel today is to really deal with that current challenge. How do we as companies and organizations maintain and build momentum in DEI&A when leadership and colleagues express DEI&A fatigue, while others no longer want to invest in DEI&A or never did in the first place? Our theme for CIVIC this year is accelerating together. And as our chair Meredith stated earlier in her earlier comments, that we want to restrain from the polarization of our community, and we have the opportunity as leaders to advance our efforts to ignite together. And by accelerating together, we can strengthen our community and enhance our collective impact. Collaboration is key. And so this year, CIVIC seeks to motivate and show participants about the how to take small as well as big steps in advancing change, particularly in the area of DEI&A. And so I have decided to structure, as moderator, structure this conversation around what I call 3 building blocks for DEI&A. And that's vision, the role of leadership in advancing DEI&A. Number 2 is organizational culture. Culture is about creating an environment where you have a system of shared beliefs, values, and practices that guides and governs people on how they behave within your organization and work environment. I am a firm believer, either you have standards or you don't. And as a former college professor, I always say students perform to the level of expectation. If you have low expectations, they'll perform at that level. If you have high expectations, they will perform high. So in the terms of DEI&A, you create an environment where the expectation is that you embrace it. And then the last building block is process, the strategies on how, the action steps, which CIVIC is focusing on this year, is the how we achieve those goals. So vision, organization, organizational culture, and process. And so I welcome our panelists, Dr. Steve Federico of Denver Health and Demisha Hill of Janice Henderson in our conversation. So I'm going to join them there. This is my, as a professor, I got to talk from the podium, right, and then go sit down. So, excuse me. So I'd like to begin by asking both of you, what was your journey into DEI&A? Dr. Federico, would you like to start?
Yeah, thank you, Ramona. I appreciate the introduction. My name is Steve Federico. I'm a pediatrician by training, and as was mentioned before, the Chief of Government Community Affairs at Denver Health. My journey started, I guess, when I was born. You know, I grew up in a border town in southern Arizona, in a community that very much was driven by the Mexican culture, son of an immigrant. And my first memory of healthcare, tying back into my future career, was taking my grandparents to healthcare facilities and serving as the interpreter. It's a common theme. And so I like to tell the story that as a physician, when I walk into one of our clinics at Denver Health at Westside or Montbello, where I've practiced for the last 15 years, I see my grandmother. I see my grandmother coming in with her kids. That's who I see, that's who I serve. And so the lens through which I approach this work is through that lens, to tell the story from the other side now, to make sure that we are doing what we can to create inviting environments that are sensitive to the diversity with which people bring their own lives into the healthcare space. And so it's a daily effort, it's a daily thought, and something that we strive to improve. So that's the lens through which I see this work.
Thank you. And you, Demisha?
Yeah, I would say my DEI journey, I am the reflection of that. I'm very diverse. I represent many demographic strands. I would say if I'm talking about equity, it's because other people have removed barriers for me so that I could actually reach my full potential, and so I feel an obligation to do the same for others. I think inclusion, there's been spaces where I felt included as well as spaces where I felt excluded, and I think we all can kind of relate to that as well. And so I feel like it's part of my responsibility to make sure that I'm creating these spaces and environments where people actually feel included. And given the industry in which I work in, there's not a lot of people that look like me. And so I'd say from a corporate standpoint, we really started down our DEI journey back in 2006. And one of the reasons why we really started to embrace this work is really to try to figure out ways in which we could eliminate groupthink. We are an investment company, so we basically sell our intellectual capital, right? And so we needed to figure out ways in which we could get people who thought differently, who looked at the world differently, right? And I brought that perspective, and I wanted to bring others into the fold that looked at the world differently so that we could look at the companies in which we invest in differently as well.
Thank you, Demisha. And I'm going to start by asking you, Demisha, the next question. When we look at, and this is under vision, as you know, it's very important that we have leaders who invest and believe in and authentically want to engage in DEI&A. So what do you think is the role of leadership in advancing DEI&A, Demisha?
There's multiple stakeholders, and I'd say the first one is your board or your leadership team. Our CEO really kind of revamped our mission, value, and purpose. Our vision is investing in a brighter future together. We have these values, and the values integrate DEI elements. Clients come first. Execution supersedes intention, so that really resonates. A lot of people say they want to do DEI work. They talk the talk, but they don't walk the walk. So execution supersedes intention. Truth builds trust. You have to be truthful with yourself on where you're starting on this journey. Diversity improves results, and together we win. It's not just one area, one department, but together as a collective we win. And so when it comes to the DEI work, it's really integrated into all of the things that we do at our organization, and I'm proud that our CEO, our leadership team, as well as our board, kind of set that stage, set that foundation for this work.
Thank you. I really had a great conversation with Dr. Steve before coming to Denver about Denver Health, and I'm really excited about talking to you about the incredible work you all are doing in Denver Health. So under organizational culture, how is your company transforming organizational culture in order to advance DEI&A? We know y'all just got this great award, right? The Lown Award. I'd like you to talk a little bit about that in y'all's work.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that, and I appreciate the opportunity to brag just a little bit. The Lown Institute is a healthcare think tank in DC, and they measure hospitals by a number of different metrics, and we recently were just awarded some recognition from them as being the most demographically diverse hospital in the state of Colorado. And what they do is they look at a predictive model based on the population around you and see if you were doing your part to serve that community, and we exceed all of those expectations at our institution. And a lot of that comes from, I think, the culture from within, the desire to serve. You know, our vision for our institution is to be proud to recommend to family and friends. We want our employees to be proud of the work that we do, such that they want their family and friends to come to our institution for healthcare. And the second part of that vision is to have trust in community. And the trust in community, I think, is incredibly key. It's hard work. I think those of you in the audience who do this work know that is an iterative process. It's not something you get to the top of the mountain. You're constantly working through. And so as part of that cultural shift a couple of years ago, to the leadership point, we recruited Lorena Zimmer, who's here in the room, to begin this work as our Chief Impact Officer and placed her on the executive team, right? It's that executive presence at the leadership level, and to begin to diversify not only the boardroom, but that executive team to bring that different lived experience to this, to make it something you think about in all things that you do. And so we're really proud of the process and the journey that we're on.
You make a great point about leadership. A lot of times we look at putting different people in leadership only in DEI&A, but actually it needs to be on the executive level. We need to have diverse opinions, diverse identities in the executive level. But I want to push you a little bit further about changing organizational culture. What did Denver Health do in terms of specific steps that we want to share with the audience in terms of working to transform organizational culture in order to embrace diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility a lot more?
Yeah, I think to driving to the culture up, down, and sideways throughout the organization, right? Lorena's team worked diligently to develop something that we refer to as the equity blueprint. It outlines these goals and outlines the process through which we'll do all work. And one of the ways they did that, it was informed by the creation of the Diversity Council, which has now become the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion and Belonging for Us Council, made up of folks not only demographically, ethnically, racially diverse in all senses of the word, but also in and up and down and across the organization. So created a safe space for people to bring issues and the willingness of the organization to learn from those day-to-day issues. That's the conversation we were having the other day, is it takes real leadership challenge to be vulnerable in this space, to learn more about your organization. We're an organization of 8,000 people, $1.4 billion in downtown Denver. That's a complex business, and so to understand all parts of that takes courage, and to create a space where people are willing to bring concerns and that maybe you're not so proud of, but you can't make progress if you don't know about them.
Yeah, I think that's so important to talk about. It goes back to the whole point of radical listening. Like, you may think everything is okay in your organization, but when you have different groups of people that can come to you honestly, to your leadership, and talk about the challenges that they see or are experiencing, that really brings a truth within the organization that you might not necessarily want to acknowledge. And so that's very important in creating those spaces where people can talk, come together, and they can also listen to each other. Thank you so much. And you, at Janice Henderson, Demisha, what are you all doing to change organizational culture? Because you talked about your 12 affinity groups, but there are other things that you also do. But could you talk about both, please?
Yeah, absolutely. So the way that we set kind of our DEI initiative, it's really, we have a DEI council committee, and it's made up of executive committee members. So that's C-suite individuals, members of senior management. It includes everyone from our chief risk officer to our chief financial officer to our chief responsibility officer, as well as myself, which set our overarching DEI strategy. We also have a regional council because we are a global organization. So we have a regional council which sits in our 3 regions, North America, EMEA, as well as in APAC. And then we have our 12 employee resource groups in our various office locations that we have. And it's really important that all 3 of these kind of governance structures work together. Our employee resource groups are on the ground. They're hearing exactly what employees are saying. They're bringing that to the regional council as well as to that DEI committee. In addition to that, we create these platforms where our employee resource groups actually sit down and talk to our CEO. He carves out time to sit down and talk to every employee resource group 2 times a year to hear what's going on, what am I missing, what am I not hearing, right? He also has kind of this open box where people can send him comments and questions or concerns. And it's not always rosy, and that's what I want people to understand. This work is hard, and that's why you have to be truthful with yourself. You have to kind of pull the mask off and really see what's going on within your organization and be willing to kind of face those challenges as well, because that's where you start to build that culture where people feel like they can believe you, you're being true and genuine to who you are as an organization. So those are some of the things that we do. In addition to that, we have this series called Authentic Self, where we have employees and senior leadership just talk about who they are as individuals. How do they get to where they are? A lot of times people think that they went to an Ivy League school, or their kind of career trajectory was very linear, and we kind of talk about the stops and the goes and the zigs and the zags, and so that makes people a little bit more relatable and they can kind of connect. So having these kind of candid conversations, having kind of this transparent lines of communication has really helped build our overall culture.
Yes, so communication is key within organizations to make sure that you build a culture that embraces DEI&A. But there are other challenges with transforming culture. Can y'all talk, or can you expand upon some of the challenges that you may have in transforming culture and how you handled that?
Sure, I can definitely talk about it. We've seen on our employee engagement survey where employees say DEI should not be part of the conversation that we're having. Why are we doing this work? And so we have to really tie it back to who we are as an individual company and tie it back to our overall corporate identity, our corporate social responsibility strategy, our ESG identity as well. A lot of times organizations, when they're talking about ESG, they talk a lot about the E, but they don't talk about the S, which includes DE&I, it includes community relations, it includes your supply chain. And so we try to hone in on the reasons why we do what we do. And then sometimes you have those tough conversations. If there's someone who's being really disruptive within your organization, maybe this isn't the right organization for them, right? And so sometimes you have to have those tough, hard conversations of, these are our fundamental values, and if you don't align with our values, that's okay. Maybe this is not the right organization for you. And so I think equipping our leadership with the tools that they need to have those conversations is key, and making sure that they have that foundation of this is our values and this is what we believe in as an organization is also key. I think the other piece from a cultural standpoint and the challenges is a lot of times people will point the finger and say, well, HR isn't doing their job, that's why we don't see the diversity within our organization. We have been very intentional about making sure that it's part of every single employee's performance evaluation. So it's not just HR's responsibility, but it's on our executive committee scorecard. Their overall year-end bonus and compensation is measured on what they're doing to help us achieve our overall DEI goals. We have to report kind of what we're doing to our board as well. And so these are some of the factors that kind of come into play to kind of change kind of that thought process of why are we doing it? We shouldn't be doing it. It's kind of part of who we are.
So yes, understanding your why is so important in your organizations. You have to understand why you're advancing DEI&A and tying it into the values of your organization. Dr. Frederico.
Yeah, I'll give you a healthcare example, and that may not apply to all of you, but it will in the space that it was difficult in a space where you may not predict that it would be difficult, and that's in the data collection phase. You know, there's an old adage, what is measured is changed, what is measured is done. We created an Office of Health Equity under the leadership of Dr. Ro Pereira, and the first assessment was we didn't actually have the accurate data that we needed to assess things like health disparities at the level that we should be measuring. And so how do we begin to hone in and create change if we don't know where the problems are? So we set off on a mission to collect better data, and currently we collect increasingly more accurate demographic data on 99% of our patients. However, doing that and getting to that is incredibly difficult because it can be a very sensitive space. Not everybody wants to answer those questions. They certainly don't want to answer them in the way that you may be posing them. So it's iterative work with your patients or your clients to understand what is a space that feels comfortable, how do you use terms that people feel comfortable, allowing space for people to create their own terminology in terms of their self-identification, and then creating data systems that collect that information so that then you can measure your performance based on your community and implement change, measure that change, and then juxtapose to that data collection over and over and over again. That was a much harder process and continues to be a much harder process than at first glance to say, just collect data on your clients and then follow that path. It's been incredibly rewarding, but incredibly difficult.
Yes, data is so important in helping you to achieve your goals, but also, as Dr. Steve stated, is cultural competency. That you have to understand the different cultures that are at your table in order that you can ask the right questions the right way and speak in a way in which people can receive and answer those questions. Thank you so much, Dr. Steve. So one of the things that I'm sure this audience wants to know is really how to deal with challenges of advancing DEI&A. As I stated in my introduction, we've come to a point where a lot of people, a lot of organizations are divesting resources in DEI&A. So the question becomes, what challenges have you all faced in advancing DEI&A? I'm sure there are many examples you can give, but give us one. And what was your way of addressing that challenge? Let's begin with Demisha. Demisha, you want to start?
I would say one of the challenges in this space, I would say a recent challenge is with the ruling around affirmative action. There were people questioning whether or not we should stop doing the work. And like I said, we started down this journey in 2007, and we were very intentional, even though this was something that was happening within kind of the educational space, we were very intentional about making a statement to our employees around our commitment to this work. And the reason why it was important for us to make a statement is because our community outreach and the things that we do from a philanthropic standpoint ties a lot into education. And so we needed to make sure that we reinforce that, yes, we understand the law, but we're going to still support those community organizations that are removing barriers and access so that kids can reach those educational outcomes. We've taken time to kind of assess what that looks like, but that's not going to waiver our commitment. I've had people within our organization say, ooh, maybe this is a risk that we need to kind of understand. And I said, that's fine, we can do the risk assessment. And after doing the risk assessment, we said that's a risk we're willing to take, right? And so you're going to encounter these challenges within your organization, but it's important for you to kind of understand the full scope of everything that's going on, and then also understand what is your risk tolerance as an organization. This is not a sprint. This is a long journey, right? And so this work is going to take time. And I think a lot of times people feel like, we've been doing this for 3 years. I haven't seen results. We didn't get to where we are in 3 years. So it's going to take a lot of time for us to do this work. And the work has to be integrated into everything that we do, whether it's our supply chain, the way in which we give to the community, the way in which we look at the companies in which we invest in. And so you have to be up for this. This is not a sprint. It's truly a marathon, a long, long marathon.
Thank you, Demisha. Dr. Steve?
Yeah, there's no question that momentum is a major challenge in this work, and it continues to be. It circles back to the leadership question. That's why leadership matters so much in this space. It takes persistence to maintain that momentum and to maintain that work, and it's certainly something we've encountered. As a safety net institution, finances are always a challenge for us. Coming up with the funds to drive this work continues to be an ongoing challenge. So we've partnered with community, and I believe Delta Dental's in the audience, and so just to acknowledge them, they've actually graciously supported this work, specifically in our dental space, where when we recruited a new dental director who came from a diverse background, left private practice to work in our sector, the first thing he identified was the lack of diversity within his department. And under the support of Delta Dental, they now have the most diverse department across the institution. But it took leadership, and then it took intentionality. I mean, he specifically defined that as something that his department needed to do to be more successful. And I agree, people are very passive in this work often. They say, after 3 years, what have we done and are we done? And I check the box, as opposed to maintaining that persistence and that intentionality driving to change.
So lastly, before we open it up to the audience, where are we on time? Because I did not bring my phone up. 10 minutes. Okay, so we're going to open it up to question and answer then. So any questions from the audience about, for any of the panelists? Yeah.
Gloria Neal with Glow Nose Consulting, DE&I and ESG Consulting is the background there. Is the addition of the letters, and this is for anyone on the panel, you know, it started out DE&I, it's DE&IA, ESG is, does that replace DE&I, and then you've got DE&I-A and B, and the same thing in the space of LGBT, it's LGBTQ, and then you've got the plus, and all of this sometimes I think does harm to what we're trying to do because people feel like they're trying to learn it, and then there's more to learn. And I ask, on the flip side of that coin, is the addition of the letters an evolution of what is happening in society, that as this grows, so shall the letters because we are all evolving?
Interesting question, and I think that the letters don't mean anything if you don't put any action behind it. So I think when I'm talking about diversity, the way we define it at our organization is any difference that makes a difference. That includes if you're a white man who's over 45, you're diverse, right? And so adding the letters, I think the letters, the reason why people are adding the letters is because they want people to actually think about it. How are we being accessible? And they feel like if they're putting that letter there, it's that trigger for people to think about, okay, am I being accessible in the way in which I may be looking at this problem or the way in which I'm setting up this event, right? And so I think they're putting it there, but what I think is happening is those people that are kind of on that fence, right? The letters are maybe pushing them one way to the other side or one way to another side, right? And I think that we can't get caught up in the letters. We need to get caught up and focused in on the actions. What are we doing to make sure that every single person feels like they're included? They feel like they're part of kind of the solution. They're part of the organization. They're part of our community. So I would say the main thing that we need to be focused in on is how do we invite more people in to the conversation?
I agree. The term that I think about is self-identification, and I think creating the space for people to self-identify if there's any, you know, the Latino community in particular is really good at defining themselves differently because we are so broad and diverse within that broader context. You know, the entire Chicano movement from the 1960s was driven by the concept of self-identification. You, the government, will not define me, I will define myself. And so this is a continuation, I think, of that, of people wanting to identify the way they would like to identify. And so as an organization, to create that space is crucial. And what we're really driving to is a better understanding of lived experience, right? And in my previous role as a director, I learned that we are a service organization focused largely on a diverse population who come from poverty, for the most part. And so how do I recruit at a professional of other providers who understand that struggle, that their daily work was going to be with families who are in poverty, many of whom the providers that we're recruiting did not come from that experience. So how do I extrapolate that in a sensitive manner to understand their lived experience and how they will connect to our patients that we're trying to serve, and creating the space so that they could identify in a way that they felt comfortable bringing that to that conversation. I think it's really difficult. I think it's a hard question, so I appreciate it.
I actually have a different take on it. My Ph.D. is in American history. I focus on American race relations, African American and Mexican American history. And I look at those two terms that you used as an example very differently. LGBTQI+, that's about self-identity, as Dr. Steve stated. And people need to be recognize how they self-identify. Whereas DEI&A and B, those are evolutionary terms. meaning diversity wasn't enough. So then we have to look at equity. Equity is not enough. You can have diversity, equity, and then there's inclusion, right? To make sure that you're including. Everybody might be equal, this room might be diverse, but I might be sitting over on the sidelines. That's why I took the moment to try to define each of those terms. So that's an evolutionary process. And Kevin Martinez even talked about that this morning when he was talking about social responsibility. That now it's corporate social responsibility, now it's corporate citizenship. All those terms evolve. And so I don't think there's a problem with using that. Now, ESG is more about how you report your ratings, right? And environmental, social, and governance. So we don't stay the same, right? We're all growing, and this whole industry is evolving as we're in it, and we just have to learn and move and grow with the terms. Any other questions in the audience? Yes. Oh, okay, excuse me, thank you.
Sorry about that. So kind of drawing on the question that just was asked, I also struggle with trying to create values for an organization pulling from DEI&B, DEI&A, whatever acronym we decide to use. And so I've often been trying to think if there is a singular concept that can kind of encapsulate all of those things. One concept that needs all of those things to operate. And so I was curious if any of you had any ideas about that. Well, that maybe if one of the concepts that's there, or something that we're not even talking about, could possibly kind of stand in for DEI&A, DEI&B, whatever it is we're doing, because it's a thing that requires all of those things.
Well, I hate to break it to you, but we are evolving. Just recently I had a conversation where we're about to add J to it for justice. So, I mean, I don't know if y'all think it's one term, but we're evolving, and so J is on the rise. So DEIABJ.
Get ready.
Go ahead.
You know, I go back to my whole thing is human beings and people. You think about this work, it's all about people. This work is connecting with people. We're in this kind of people kind of business, right? And so how do you make sure that people feel a part of what you're doing? And so that would be my thing, just kind of keep people at the forefront of everything that you're doing, because that's what it's all about at the end of the day.
Next question.
I don't run a tech company, so this is, my name's Stacey Sanders. I'm the founder and executive director of an organization that we work with current and former youth in foster care in a variety of ways. And so encompassing all of this is part of my everyday for the kids that we serve. And we self-identify, and we've been working on the pronouns and making it safe, but we're trying to make it safe for everything and incorporate, because I want my volunteers to represent the youth that we serve as much as possible. But to look at somebody, you don't know that I'm Jewish, you don't know that I have Parkinson's and a challenge, and so the way we write grants now is different. The way we ask for money from foundations is all different. And so I decided a couple years ago to write to the work that we do and find the money that way. So my question after that long preamble is, how do you, or do any of you, or how do you make it comfortable for people to self-identify beyond gender or pronouns?
Well, it's, first of all, thank you for your work in that vulnerable population. We share that mission very much. It's definitely been a space that has evolved very rapidly in healthcare. One that just a short time ago did not exist. And so the creation of that space and the understanding of that space is evolving. So I don't make this comment from the position of expertise, but rather experience. And what we have started to do is make it universal. We ask every time when we have a new patient come in, What are your pronouns? How do you identify? What's your preferred name, et cetera? And so as that space expands, we need to continue to expand with it to create that openness. And I think the universality of it and of the approach, I think, is key to driving at that.
Thank you. Any other questions?
Thank you. Hi, I'm Peter Fromater from Health One, and this is a follow-up to making a statement when things change legislatively or legally. How do you address different policy changes in different areas of operation? So you mentioned being a global company, all the laws may not apply across the board, and does your organization have one set policy for the entire company, or does it change by locale?
Yeah, so as far as policies are concerned, when we're talking about our DEI policy, kind of equal opportunities, harassment, things like that, those are global overarching policies. But we also know that there's certain countries in which we operate in where the protections that they have within the four walls of our organization are not the same protections that they might have out there in their community. Right, and so we recognize that as well and are very sensitive to that, but we try to assure those employees that while they're working within our organization, these are the protections that they have in place. We are very, very sensitive to when we do go out and we make statements around certain things. So we kind of assess, how does that statement kind of, what's happening in the landscape? How does that kind of align with what we believe in as an organization? And so we have a whole communications team that works with myself, others, to kind of help determine whether or not this is something that we are going to go out and make a statement about as an organization. But we also are very sensitive to the cultural norms of the countries in which we're operating in. I think sometimes a lot of US-based companies will take a US-centric approach when they maybe go and operate in a different country. And so it's important that you understand the different nuances, the historical landscape of those countries, to understand the reasons why things might be the way that they are, and then have your own internal policies that might support your values that you want all employees to kind of adhere to.
Thank you. Okay, next question.
Hi. Oh, that's louder than I thought it was going to be. Hi, my name is Macy Poland. I am the Diversity, Equity, Inclusion, and Belonging Partner at Empower. My question specifically pertains to employee resource groups. So I'm curious, well, one, as a preface, I think business resource groups, employee resource groups are commonly misinterpreted or perceived as groups that are solely focused on food and fun activities, when while we do have a lot of food and we have a lot of fun, I think there's a lot of important business impacts that come from ERGs. And so I'd love to know, how do you ensure that your ERGs are focused on those business impacts, and then how do you articulate those business impacts to your leadership?
Having 12 employee resource groups from around the world, we make sure that they're well aware of our overall global strategy. And so there are some components where there is celebratory activities that they will do, but we always ask them, how does this tie into what we're trying to do from a DEI standpoint? Is it helping with our attraction? Is it helping with our retention? Is it going to improve our overall, employee engagement numbers? How does it actually tie? Also, we empower our employee resource groups to do additional things, like if there is something that they're seeing from a policy standpoint that needs to be changed at our organization, they have that power to put forth policy recommendations and changes, propose new benefit enhancements that need to be implemented. A lot of our great robust enhancements that we've done, as well as voluntary benefits, are a result of initiatives that have been brought about by our employee resource groups. And so leveraging them in that way, as well as letting the business know that they are a resource if you're trying to get a different perspective on maybe a new approach or a new product or new demographic that you want to reach out to, test it out with the employee resource group first. So I think it's important to position them as more than just kind of a club per se. They're truly a resource for the business.
Dr. Steve?
Yeah, I think I think it has to be bidirectional, right? I mean, not only are you from an executive level talking about company goals and strategies in this direction, it's listening to those ERGs and giving them a pathway to push the organization forward. Some of the pronoun work that we just were talking about came from one of our ERGs, pushing that work back up through the organization. And I think the existence of ERGs is very important, that space and that conversation is bidirectional, because I think that's one of the powers of diversity in and of itself, right? I mean, it's the recruitment of the best talent, but it's diversifying the ideas and thoughts within an organization. And if you're going to have a group like that, it's got to be bidirectional communication.
Next question.
Yeah, hi everyone. I work for a smaller consulting firm, and we do ESG consulting for commercial real estate owners, mainly on the E and the G. However, I was nominated recently to lead our DEI committee next year. So I was wondering, do you have any advice, tips on where to start? And I guess I'll preface this with, the committee's been around for about 18 months. Our parent company is Legence, which is an energy accelerator, and they have about 1,300 employees, and they're looking to us for guidance. And then the parent company above that is Blackstone. So we have some financial backing and help, and we've done some cool initiatives, like we've gotten ERGs started within the entire Legence brand. We have pronouns in our email signatures. We're working on cultural observances and belonging for remote employees, but I wasn't sure if there was a place you had somewhere to start. We're obviously way less sophisticated than you all, but.
Well, that's a great question, which leads to our final question, which is what are some strategies for building, maintaining, and sustaining DEI&A? And so if there are any other questions before we go to the panel for that, I know that sometimes in some organizations, DEI&A issues are quite sensitive, and so I would like to open the door if anybody would like to talk to us privately afterwards to share some ideas, that we'll be open to that. I say that without even asking them. But anyway, if there are any other questions, please, yes.
Yeah, just one last one.
Mm-hmm.
Steve, I wonder if you could talk about, as a physician, the relationship between belonging and mental health and burnout for employees and your constituents.
That's might be a lecture unto itself, right? I mean, I think I'll say this: as a general pediatrician, our evolving knowledge about mental health over my career, which spans over 20 years now, is incredible. The limited training and exposure that we got beyond traditional mental health diagnoses was so incredibly limited compared to my daily experience as a clinician now. And I think we just learned about the tip of the iceberg about the lack of space for, especially in my case, youth, to express their diversity in all ways, and how that impacts their mental health moving forward. It is undoubtedly a significant component of the epidemic that we are experiencing before COVID, certainly exacerbated by COVID, in that space with both young adults, but as well as youth and adults as well. I think there's still much to learn in that space, and I think that the burnout factor contributes because people want to be successful, especially in healthcare, in helping other people. And when you don't feel like you have the tools or the language or the space to do that, it significantly exacerbates burnout. And I think, again, it's something we're just beginning to understand, let alone know how to impact it. But I think the beginning is the recognition.
Thank you.
Can I make a comment on that one? I think mental health is really key, and I think if we're looking at this DEI&A work, you need to start to think about the intersectionality of mental health and the environments in which you're creating within your organization. So if you have an environment where there's a lot of undertone microaggressions that are happening within your workplace, think about the underrepresented talent within your organization and the psychological toll that it takes on their overall mental health. And depending on the demographic in which they represent, they might not feel comfortable talking about mental health because some have been taught from wee high, be strong, right? Men, man up, you can handle this, right? And I think we need to start having these conversations about mental health and the intersectionality of these identities and the cultures in which we're creating and the environments in which we're creating that can have a positive impact on someone's overall mental health or negative impact on someone's overall mental health. And I think microaggressions are that kind of underlying kind of those cuts that happen
Demisha,
within your workplace
excuse me,
that could really have an impact.
Could you take a moment, please, first to define microaggressions?
Yeah, so those are kind of those subtle, unintended kind of discriminatory things that people do say to people from underrepresented, marginalized groups, right? That could maybe undermine who they are as an individual, undermine their overall identity. And so I think it's important in this mental health space and what we're talking about, understand that toll of those microaggressions. And sometimes you might see why some people might prefer to work from home because they don't have to deal with the microaggressions, right? And so start to look at these things through these different lenses. And I know we just got a minute, so I'm gonna wrap it up. Sorry.
So also on microaggressions, we all in our various work environments must be intentional about addressing them. A lot of times we are silent or we consider ourselves to be nice and not want to confront various issues. If we're going to be about DEI&A, as we all have stated, we all have to be intentional about it. So with our final statements, of course, we want to go back to the question, what are ideas for building strategies? Because as Meredith stated, and what we want to do at CIVIC this year is to have specific actionable items. What can people do to build, maintain, and sustain DEI&A in their organizations or companies? Demisha, we'll begin with you.
I would say understand your why. Determine what problem you're trying to solve by assessing your team. How are you going to measure success, and understand what your desired outcomes are going to be, and who are those key stakeholders that you need to get involved in your overall journey.
Yeah, I think it's, you need to be brave to ask and listen and act based on that. When our new CEO came a year ago, Donna Lynn, one of the first things that she did is reach out to community to drive that trust and community component of our vision, and brought in different members, different leadership members of different affinity groups from our community so that she could listen. And I think that iterative process needs to be part of your culture moving forward to continue to learn.
And I would say it definitely begins with leadership. Leadership has to buy into, and that's all levels of leadership, from your executive level to the management level to people who are on the ground who have influence. You have to have your leadership, you have to have the commitment or intentionality, and you have to have resources. A lot of times people say this is what they want, but they don't back it up with money, time, and energy. So you definitely want to have a resource commitment to diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility. With that being said, that's the end of our session. You see everybody's coming in hungry for lunch. Again, we're available to speak after if any of you have any questions. Thank you so much for attending this session.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you. We've learned so much in the last hour and sorry, the timing, the cards, I apologize. And I can't wait to share these learnings with my team.